Hello and welcome to Chapter 8. Here we're going to discuss how to design and evaluate training systems. All right, let's begin in our learning objectives. By the end of this chapter, you should be able to conduct a training needs analysis, explain the various training methods, develop a training program, apply the psychological theories behind successful training, and evaluate the effectiveness of a training program. All right, so let's start off by discussing why training is so important. First off, more than 90% of Fortune 500 companies have some kind of formal training program, some kind of day that you spend learning the ins and outs of this organization, all the way up to weeks of on-the-job training. U.S. organizations spend $126 billion annually on employee learning and development. So when I've been telling you that organizations have invested a lot into an employee, so to have them leave is costly, right? Organizations help their employees to fit in and to function within the organizational structure, and that's one of the big important factors in training. The average training budget for a Fortune 100 company, which is the top 100 companies, the average training budget is $19 million. That's a lot of money. That's in 2022 money, so it's probably a little higher now. But the average training budget that a Fortune 100 company spends, so the top 100 companies spend over $19 million a year on training. That's a lot of money. Obviously, they think it's important. So why is it necessary? If we have a great selection technique that we've spent 3 chapters now talking about how to develop. If we have a great selection technique that's designed to identify high performers, why do we need training? I mean, don't they come to us already having the skills that we want? Well, it's possible that they have really great skills, but they still need skills that are specific to this particular job. Every organization is a little different from every other organization, and they may need specific job skills for this particular organization. Maybe organizational specific training. We have, in different organizations, sort of employee handbook issues that get after, like the context issues, the things that make this organization different and how we expect you to function within this organization and things like that. Experienced employees, people who have been working at this organization for a while, sometimes need to be retrained due to maybe they have moved to another job within the organization. Maybe time has elapsed and circumstances have changed, and so the job is going to include new things, new skills, new knowledge that maybe we don't expect this person to have had. So experienced employees need training. Sometimes we're just training experienced employees so that they can just continue to develop. I take a lot of continuing development classes every single year. Webinars and training programs on how to teach better and, how to engage students and, how to build community in a classroom and all these things, because things have changed. It's, over the course of my personal career, I know that one of the things that has significantly changed is that students don't necessarily naturally befriend each other in class. They'll sit next to each other or in each other's, realm, but they don't even necessarily talk to each other. They never exchange names. They don't exchange phone numbers. They don't become friends. So one of the things I've been trying to work on in the last few years is to help students to become friends with each other, to be the one who extends your hand. And a lot of times that's all it takes for somebody else to go, oh, good, because I wanted to make a friend in college too. But that's part of my continuing development. I'm trying to figure out these things. And so I take classes and things that might help me to do those things. And I'm in the same career, but the situation demands flexibility. Increased organizational development plus job satisfaction leads to increased productivity, decreased absenteeism, less turnover. So the more training is offered, the more an organization gives the employee the impression that we want you to become your best self. We want you to stay here. The more the employee reciprocates with organizational commitment and job satisfaction. And then Better productivity comes from that. They're less likely to be absent. They're less likely to quit. So it's needed for the top 3 squares reasons, and then it's beneficial for the little smart art that I put at the bottom there. So what is training? Well, the formal procedures, so put that in italics, right? Because some organizations call it training when all you do is sort of follow an incumbent employee as they go about their day. That's not training. That's just sort of following somebody. Formal procedures are what we're talking about when we use the word training. That an organization utilizes, McGee and Thayer use the word company, but there are other kinds of organizations. So that a company utilizes to facilitate learning, put that in italics because learning is a specific term, so that the resultant behavior, also a specific term, contributes to the attainment of the organization's goals and objectives. So I highlighted all those things because those terms are really specific, right? So when we're talking about training, we mean the formal procedure type of thing that facilitates the kind of learning that will change behavior in the future, that will help to achieve the goals and objectives of the organization. Probably most of you are psych majors, but for those of you who aren't, the word learning is a very specific term in psychology. It refers to relatively permanent change in your behavior as a result of experience. That's the formal definition of learning. Relatively permanent change in behavior as a result of experience. So when we talk about learning in this context, we're meaning that kind of relatively permanent change. So once we've trained you, we want you to do these actions from now on, right? Behavior is the thing that's going to be admitted as evidence of learning. So from now on, we want you to do it this way because we trained you to do it this way. We want you to have these answers when a customer calls. We want you to operate the machinery this way. And so that's what we mean when we talk about learning and behavior, is this very specific definition of learning and behavior. All right, so how do we determine whether training is needed? Obviously, we have to identify any needs before we try to develop a training program. There is nothing worse than being sent to training that you don't need. There's nothing worse. I will probably more than once during this class complain about the fact that I have been to sexual harassment training I don't know how many times. It feels like maybe this should not expire so quickly. Like the fact that I took it within the past 10 years means I probably still remember what I was taught, right? I feel like there isn't a need for me anymore. But of course, everybody has to do it because everybody has to be treated the same, I guess. I don't know. But it feels like one step in assessment could be to determine whether the person has already had the training. That feels like a reasonable bar for deciding whether we need a training program. Things that can contribute to maybe even if people have been trained, maybe they need to be trained again because something has changed, right? There's new information. There's something that we need to add in. So I always go with hope that my 13th time taking sexual harassment training, there'll be something new. There has not been. But when we talk about developing training, there are different approaches, different ways that we can go about it. One is competency-based training, where we're going to look for the competencies that are necessary within the organization that we want everyone in the organization to have. Knowing how not to be a sexual harasser and how to respond if you are sexually harassed. Those might be competencies that the organization wants all employees to have, right? So we want you to have this competency of how to identify harassing behaviors, how to respond to harassing behaviors, right? Those would be competencies, and we would want all of our employees to have it. So you would develop the training program around those competencies. You would specifically recognize what is missing or what must from now on be there, and then develop programs that address those competencies. So there are 4 different ways that we can go about assessing the needs. One is organizational, one is task, one is person, and one is demographic. So let's go through those one by one. So organizational analysis. So in this kind of analysis, we determine what the organization's goals are. Now that sounds pretty easy. Oh, let's just ask somebody, but no, there's a lot of work that goes into that. But anyway, we determine the organization's goals and compare those goals to what is documentably the accomplishments within the organization. Any goals that are existing in the organization that do not have evidence of having been met would be good topics for training. So if you have a goal of everybody knowing how to use the lathe correctly in this woodworking shop, and you discover that people are getting hurt using it, or that wood or whatever material you're using is getting wasted when people are using it, you might say, we have a goal of people knowing how to use the lathe, but it kind of looks like they don't know how. Let's have a training session on that. So one of the things that we want to keep in mind whenever we're developing any kind of training using this kind of organizational analysis is what the culture is in this organization about getting trained. Some organizations don't really value training. They look at it as a waste of paid time, and they want it to be quick. They want it to be, maybe not even do it. They would just like their employees to know it, and they don't want to waste their time with the training. So they might begrudge people who are going to the training. They might be counter to the training. Others might be really gung-ho on training. They're like, everybody needs to go to these training sessions. Blah, blah, blah. They love the training sessions. And maybe the employees who need to go through the training are like, I don't want to go through another training session. But the culture in their organization is to do all the trainings. There's a lot of things for us to learn. So one question that an organizational psychologist might ask themselves is whether training is viewed as important to the organization. Is development of the employees viewed as important to this organization? Because if it's not, it doesn't make a lot of sense to put a lot of effort into the training. Maybe you want to have very brief little bites of training that doesn't really disrupt the day or the workflow, things like that. Task analysis is another way to figure out the needs of a training program, whether there's one needed or not, things like that. So in this kind of analysis, you're going to examine the task requirements for successful conduct of each job within the organization. So we're going to have to start off with task-oriented job analysis. Oh, I got job analysis in. Just going to start with a task-oriented job analysis to figure out what things people do every day. And then you're going to select people when you're hiring that have as many of these kinds of skills as possible. And then you design training programs for any gaps that tend to be present in your incoming employees or the employees that are moving to a new job and whatever. So it's all based on the tasks. And so you're going to have a lot of task-based training. How to use the lathe would be a good example of a task-based training. Sexual harassment would not be. So task analysis. Person analysis. So how well all employees are performing. And we're going to rely on performance appraisal data to identify those employees who need training. It could be that the employees might just self-nominate as well. It could be that you say, you know what, you've been selected to go to this training, and it's based on things that were mentioned in the performance analysis. Or it might be that, this opportunity is provided and people volunteer to do it or not to do it. It might be that you decide to administer a test to everybody to figure out who needs the additional training, because sometimes people don't know that they don't have a skill. They're not even aware that it is a skill, so they don't know whether they have it or not, so they're not volunteering. Maybe it hasn't come up, and so it was never on a performance evaluation. So administering a test would be a way to identify people in those circumstances. And then finally, we have the demographic analysis. And this is where you determine training needs for demographic groups. So this is a tricky one. You can really stick your foot in it with this one, because maybe you say to yourself, well, older folks are not that familiar with how these fancy computers work, so we're going to offer anybody with gray hair or anybody who HR tells us is over the age of 55 or whatever other discriminatory and stereotyping thing you want to do, we're going to give them training. That's a little risky. So unless there is a documented need for certain kinds of people who fit some kind of demographic niche to need training that other people from other demographic groups don't need, probably avoid this one. This one's a good one to get your foot stuck in a trap. That's all I can say. So these are the 4 different ways that we can analyze the job and find out whether training is needed at all, and if it's needed, what kind of training, and if we have decided that it's needed and what the kind is, who needs it. All right, let's go ahead and take a break here, and we'll start next on learning context.